Hi, my name is Nicole. Today I'm working with the pharmacy at Mapleview Community Hospital to help them figure out what the total cost of filling prescriptions for 3 different drugs are. Prescriptions for drug A require refrigeration in order to keep the drug active. Prescription A is also still on patent, which means that the price of the drug is relatively high to its cost. Prescription B is a drug that has potentially fatal reactions with other drugs and therefore requires additional counseling from a pharmacist to a patient when the patient picks up the prescription. Prescription C is a fairly basic common drug. Since each of these drugs have different activities that are related to them, we're going to use the activity-based costing method to determine what the total cost of filling the prescription for each type of drug is. We're going to solve this problem today using Excel. I've been given this information from Mapleview Hospital's pharmacy to try to look at how we can allocate the cost of the different overhead activities for the prescriptions. The 3 activities I'll be allocating the cost for are refrigeration, materials handling, and prescription review. So in order to allocate the cost, I first need to determine an allocation rate for each different activity. So the first activity I'm going to look at is refrigeration. So for prescription A, there's 1 unit of cost driver for each prescription A that's filled. So I'm going to take the cost driver here, and then I'm going to multiply it by the annual volume of that prescription. I'm going to do the same for prescription B. So again, I'm looking at refrigeration and the cost driver per 1 prescription B, which is 0, multiplied by the total annual volume of prescription B, which is 200. So that comes out to 0 because prescription B does not need to be refrigerated. For prescription C, I'm going to do the same thing. So I look at the number of units needing refrigeration for prescription C, multiplied by the annual volume of prescription C. And again, I get 0 because it doesn't need to be refrigerated. So the total number of units needing refrigeration is going to be the sum of the refrigeration units here. So I have 50. I know that the total cost is $8,000. And the units that I'm dividing that among is 50. So I'm going to get the allocation rate here by taking the annual cost and dividing it by the number of units needing this activity. So I get $160 per unit. If I look at getting the allocation rate for materials handling, again, I'm going to look at the number of cost drivers per 1 prescription for prescription A. So that's going to be 50, and multiply that by the volume of prescription A that's filled in a year, which is 50 also. Then I'm going to do the same for prescription B and look at the number of cost drivers for material handling, or the number of cost driver per 1 prescription, which is 20. So it's 20 feet to the storage area for prescription B. Multiply that by the number of prescription Bs filled in a year. And do the same for prescription C. So I'm going to look at the number of feet to the storage area for prescription C multiplied by the 1,000 prescription Cs that are filled in a year. So that tells me that over the year, there are 10,000 feet traveled to fill prescription C alone. And to find the number of feet traveled for all of the prescriptions, I'm going to take the sum of this row again. So in total, there are 16,500 feet traveled So there's 16,500 feet attributed to this materials handling cost. So the allocation rate, that's going to be per foot travel to the storage area, is equal to the total annual costs divided by the total annual number of feet traveled for all prescriptions. So that's $1.45 per foot. Then if I look at the cost of prescription review and how I'm going to allocate that, I look at the number of pharmacist minutes spent with prescription A multiplied by the number of prescription A's filled that year. So there's 750 minutes spent filling prescription A's this year. I'm going to do the same for prescription B. So there's 60 minutes spent for each prescription B that's filled times 200 prescription B's. So the pharmacist spent 12,000 minutes over the course of the year counseling patients for prescription B. And then I'm going to take the number of minutes for prescription C multiplied by the annual volume of prescription C. So I can find out then the total number of minutes that a pharmacist spent counseling patients. So the pharmacist spent 15,750 minutes counseling patients for the 3 different prescriptions. And then the allocation rate is the total cost of the pharmacist minutes divided by the number of minutes spent. So it's $5.71 per minute for each prescription. So now that I have the allocation rates, I can find out what the overhead allocated to each prescription is. So if I look at, so when allocating these amounts to each prescription, I'm going to be taking the allocation rate that we determined per unit multiplied by the cost driver for that activity, or rather the activity data. So I'm going to take the refrigeration here. For prescription A, the allocation rate is $160 per units needing refrigeration. And for each, we determined that prescription A has 50 units that need to be refrigerated over the course of the year. So that full $8,000 is being attributed to prescription A. If I look at prescription B, the allocation rate is again 160, but multiply that to the number of units needing refrigeration, and it's 0. And then I do the same for prescription C, where I take the allocation rate multiplied by the number of units needing refrigeration, and again it's 0. If I do materials handling, this is based on the number of square feet that the prescription needs to be brought to the storage area. So I'm going to take the allocation rate and multiply it by the number of feet that it needs to travel for each prescription. So for prescription A, it travels 2,500 feet over the course of the year. So $3,636.36 will be attributed to prescription A's material handling costs. For prescription B, I'll take the allocation rate again and multiply it by the number of feet traveled here, so the 4,000 feet. And for prescription C, I'll again take the allocation rate and multiply it by the number of feet traveled to the storage area. So you can see that prescription C's major cost so far is the materials handling, and it has 3 times the amount for materials handling attributed to it than prescription B, which is the next highest. Then if I'm looking at prescription review, I again will take the allocation rate and multiply it by the annual amount of cost driver for prescription A, and do the same for prescriptions B and C, where I take the allocation rate and multiply by the number of minutes spent on prescription review. So if I wanted to double check my work, I could take the total annual overhead here So just take the sum of the annual cost that I was given. So it's $122,000. And then I could take the totals for each prescription of overhead and get the grand total here. So the total for all prescriptions would be the sum of all of these. And I can see that all of the overhead costs that were initially given to me have been allocated to the different prescriptions. So that's good. That means I'm not missing any of the costs that I need to allocate. So based on this information, I can add the total overhead costs to the direct costs to find out what the total cost is of filling each prescription. So if I do, I'm going to take the direct costs, overhead, so the total amount, and then the amount per prescription. So for prescription A, the direct cost is given to me here, $7,668. The overhead amount I calculated here, it's $15,922.08. So the total amount is just going to be the direct costs plus the overhead costs. And then if I want to find out the amount per prescription, I just need to take the total amount and divide it by the number of prescriptions filled that year. So there's 50 prescription A's filled. So it costs $471.80 per prescription. For prescription B, the direct costs given to me are $48,840. The overhead costs I calculated here to be $74,389.61. And so the total amount will just be the direct costs plus the overhead. And again, the amount per prescription is equal to the total amount divided by the volume of that prescription filled, which is 200. So it's $616.15 to fill prescription B. And then to find out what prescription C is, again, I can take the direct costs that are given to me here, the overhead amount that I calculated by allocating the overhead. The total amount is just the direct cost plus the overhead cost, and the amount per prescription is the total amount divided by the annual volume. So these are the final costs that I obtain after taking the overhead and allocating it to each prescription based on the activity that is spent. So if we look, it's actually prescription B that costs the most because it's high prescription review and the materials handling costs. This is interesting because if we look at the costs versus the charges, prescription A is charging more because it still has the patent. Prescription B, they're still charging double what the direct costs are, but the total costs are pretty high actually. And the total cost for prescription B, when we look at the activity-based allocation, the costs are actually higher than the charges, which is interesting and could be useful for management when determining their pricing.